and welcome to AIJCast, a podcast featuring conversations and performances at the intersection of art, inspiration, and justice. I'm your host, Marthame Sanders. On this episode, part 2 of our collaboration with Eley. Eley is a photographer based here in Atlanta, and in this conversation, we drill down on our conversation from part 1, where we talked about what Eley finds inspiring at the moment and what is calling her attention. Eley and I sat down in the Eley photo studio. Well, Eley, here we are, back with part 2 of our collaboration.
Let's do this, part 2.
And so looking back a little bit on part 1 of our conversation and then starting to brainstorm about what we might make together. So there were so many good things we talked about, and I know you've got some good notes. The 2 things that I really zoned in on were conversations around space, which started off talking about this advertising campaign of Tim Tatter. Also the idea of having space in your life, so it's not hustle and grind 24/7. And then the second thing was, for me, talking about the fullness of humanity, whether it's recognizing the fullness of your own humanity or the fullness of humanity in others and people who are celebrating that. What were the things that you really kind of resonated with you from our conversation?
Patience. Being able to sit still long enough to fully receive somebody else. Being able to be patient with what's going on around your life, to be able to say, this is what I need.
Yeah.
And somewhere in between how those come together in your art.
That seems to me to relate to the idea of space, right? So it's not about, you don't fill up the borders of everything, which is also like good photography, right? You don't make it too busy.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't
All right,
know.
I'll shut up now. I have gone way beyond what I actually know about. So.
That could take me to a whole nother, you know what I mean, situation. But yeah, I get it. Like, don't pour too much art sauce on it. It's really like back to the core of what makes a strong photograph.
Right.
Your compositional strategy.
The composition. That's see, I knew you would say it much better than I would. So I love that. Is there anything else that kind of resonated?
I mean, you know, I'm a list person.
Yeah.
So I have tons of notes.
Read them out.
All right. So I think you already mentioned Tim Tatter, and that's where my inspiration of like color and being very technically driven comes from, as far as the type of art I create. Pushing the boundaries past kind of saying like, yeah, that looks good enough. We'll call it a day. Like, dive in and say, okay, well, how can I push the boundaries to make that a little bit better, or a little bit different than what is to be expected? And maybe we can do that together and figure out how we're expanding our ideas. And then, like you mentioned, of course, I think a heavy hitter was going to be the space between you personally and creatively, so that you can heal yourself in a certain way. Being able to spend time with yourself to reflect and say, okay, how do I resonate and how do I balance being feminine and masculine and trusting my gut and finding intuition. And
not buying into like what society says or you're supposed to be because of this kind of stuff. Yeah.
Right. Or just kind of reimagining the balance of that for yourself, because we all have both parts, right? And it's always like, oh, well, you need to be more of this, or, oh, you know, this is demanding this of you, you know? So it's like, okay, well, let me re-identify that for myself and check in with myself more. And then I think that really kind of being more fully yourself, digging deeper and finding the truth about what you've been scripted to understand or told to believe. I think that's really important to me.
I really resonate with that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think the last kind of part for me was your statements and how that's really circles back to honoring the full humanness in somebody first, before trying to say you're wrong or you're irrelevant or false to whatever you're saying. People come from different backgrounds and different understandings, and I'm realizing the more that I step out of my comfort zone, or the more out of like my parents' nests or whatever you want to chalk it up to be, that you're going to be exposed to these people. And it's really a test of self to understand, like, am I willing to be uncomfortable and learn from them, but also appreciate them and honor them and who they are as their own unique being.
Right. So it's the way I heard about it just yesterday, actually, was this idea of believing people in their experiences. That's the starting assumption. So yeah, it's that meeting them where they are with their full humanity, and then going from there into conversation, adjusting, adapting, pushing back, whatever. But the starting point is, I see you as fully who you are, and I trust that. And I don't know what that means for me yet. I don't know what that means for our relationship, but that's the starting point.
Yeah.
So the fun and the challenge of this is that we're going to make something together.
Yes, which is going to be great. I'm super excited to do this. I'm always excited to collaborate with you.
Right.
So, yeah.
Likewise. Yeah. And the challenge of it, of course, is that we could go in a billion different directions and we could engage in a multi-year, multi-prong, like super large project. And so that's where the guardrails come in and kind of say like, okay, we've got a time constraint, we got a budget constraint, we've got a 2-person constraint. So what does that look like? And so I don't know if you've had any thoughts about that or if just what we're talking about now makes you think about anything.
I think it's going to come up now, honestly. And like, again, this is practicing what I preach by the fact that like we have carved out space to do this separate from, you know, everything else that we have. We're in the midst of the holidays, to put a little time stamp on it. And it's like the end of the year. So there's finalizing all of the stuff with the business, the clients, all that, and making time for your family. But this is creating space for myself to explore something different and to be reconnected. So
that's cool. I love that
right now.
I think for me, these things gestate even when I'm not thinking about it. And then also having the time set aside to process it and think about it out loud together. There are 2 things that come to mind for me. And again, like I'm going to fully step into photography, not knowing what I'm talking about.
Get in there.
But one of the things is I'm thinking about that idea of space and having enough space is what would it look like to have photography of a subject or subjects where they are a tiny part of the frame. So that the space is really the focus of the frame. And then there's this subject that's in this corner, in the middle, wherever, but they're like such a tiny part of what's happening.
I love that.
So that's one thing. The other is I'm thinking about this fullness of humanity and which always makes me think of transparency and authenticity. I'm not going to filter it. I don't know what, I'm putting all kinds of caveats on it, but it was this idea of overlaying somebody with like a skeleton of themselves.
Okay.
So like a see-through. You remember those old biology books where you peel back the pages and it would have like the skeleton and the muscles and everything?
Yeah. Interesting. How could we play with that? Because I like the tangible experience of that possibly. We're probably going to go to the moon and then have to dial back whatever we do.
That's cool. Let's go to the moon.
But I think that that's pretty cool because we're talking about transparency. You're talking about layers of a being, you know, spiritually, you know, physically, all of the things that come into that. The space inside could be visually communicated possibly in a certain way. But I also do really like the first idea that you said as far as a space, like a canvas, and like people or subject being in a small portion of it. And it's like, what are we expanding our minds and looking at then? Because obviously if it's such a vast landscape, the focus becomes, your eye-catching point becomes that small subject, but the focus is really about what's in the space.
Right.
And I think that that's really cool because I obviously shoot very tight portraits, intimate portraits, headshots, things like that. So it's very dialed in on that specific person's 100%, face.
Yeah.
So I like the idea of pulling back and saying what else is around. But it also, I've always been inspired by going to the art galleries and seeing these beautiful watercolor or whatever kind of paintings that were of landscapes.
Yeah.
And it was just like tiny farmhouse over here or whatever. You know what I mean? But like there's that beautiful like wash of color being played up into this atmosphere, I think is really cool. So if we're making space for ourselves, we're making space to see something else differently, which could be kind of cool to communicate.
Yeah.
Subconsciously sitting in the background, and watercolor is, I was always the kid that was doing a billion things and maybe my mind moves too fast, but watercolor requires patience. And I could never sit with watercolor long enough because I wanted to add the next color, but you have to wait for it to dry. You have to wait for it to run to the place it's going to stop and stuff like that. So I always ended up making brown, you know, like it all mixed together.
Right, like, there's the red. All right, let's do the blue. All right, this is green. Yeah,
exactly.
Now it's brown. Yeah,
exactly. But I always found an appreciation for watercolor because it's not something that I've had the patience for.
I wonder about that idea of patience with the overlays and almost this like a forced way of taking time with each layer. Because part of what I'm thinking about is more like archival stuff or even just like digital stuff of like muscles and bones and stuff that gets fixed in post and then put behind whatever the subject is, whoever the subject is that we're taking a photo of and what that would look like. Because I think there's also something very, and this is where I'm kind of going with this, is regardless of sexuality, race, whatever identity markers we put on someone, when you strip it down, it's largely the same underneath, right? That's like that human essence.
Absolutely.
Is that biological, that physical stuff.
Absolutely. And it'd be interesting to figure out a way to take a look internally and do that. I did do some work similarly to what we're talking about when I was going through my undergrad program, and it was a big piece called Structure. And it was macro shots of the male and female body that was as close as like the genitals, and then as zoomed out as like something more common that we all have, such as pores and eyelashes and things like that. So it was saying from the out, it was like, I can't remember how many pieces it was, but it was 4x5 pieces in this giant grid that became like about 6 feet wide on each side. And so the whole conversation was that, you know, when you look at us, we are all the same. But as you zone in on something, what's the difference?
The distinctions,
But yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting to like kind of take an approach at that too, and like expand on that thought, possibly.
Eley on AIJCast. We'll be back with more of our conversation in just a moment, but first, a quick word. As always, I encourage you to visit the AIJCast website, which is aijcast.com, and a great place to find links to our artists, including their news, information, and products. Among the things you'll find there are links to Eley and Eley's photography work. And as always, I remind you to check out our AIJCast merchandise. We have just released a new retro design for our t-shirt, so I encourage you to check that out as well at the shop section of our website. And as always, you can find all of this and more on our website, which is AIJcast.com. And now, back to more of our conversation with Eley. The other thing that it just made me think of was our mutual friend Joshua Rashad McFadden's project Come to Selfhood, where he's pairing these pictures of black men with pictures of their father at the same age or their father figure at the same age with these personal essays about themselves.
Okay.
And what would it look like to have a subject, as you peel back layers, talking about different aspects of their personality or their identity? So the superficial. And the way I'm thinking about it, again, going back to those old anatomy textbooks, right? So like the front is the Eley special of the photo of the person, and they talk about who I am, this is what I do. It's kind of like your bio that you throw up on your website. You peel back and you go to the muscles, and then it gets a little deeper into, I don't know, insecurities or hopes or fears, and then you peel back to the bones and you talk about strengths and whatever. And it could be that kind of just a personal essay. And the patience part is you've got to sit with each image as you read it and then peel back.
Yes. Yeah. So that means it's a exercise in patience. Whatever we create has to be filled up on that page. So you can't just be like 2-liner, get to the next page.
Right.
You know? Okay. All right, cool. How do we, with my medium and your medium, create such a book? You know what I mean? Is this a metaphorical book that would be in the making of said portrait in some way that is captured through audio, and that's where the length of the dialogue comes in? You know what I'm saying? Or do we make a tangible, quick fold book kind of thing that has the finalized portrait, the writing behind it, the sounds maybe of the individual, you know, the heart, the lungs, whatever, you know, to like, because that would be really gorgeous too. And so it's like in these layers, you know, because you know I'm all about trying to get your audio in here, and like that would be cool to get.
Wow.
These sounds
of the body.
Of the person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of that can be done, I think, again, with like archival stuff that's already out there.
Okay.
Right. So like sounds of heartbeats, sounds of lungs, sounds of, I don't know what other sounds organs make, but surely they make sounds.
I mean, your organs gurgling.
Or your stomach gurgling, your stomach growling. Yeah.
Yeah.
That, oh, wow.
Or I wonder, like, scientifically, if they have sounds of, like, when the mind, like, gets signals.
Like an MRI, like a fMRI, like a high...
Something, but
the audio version of it.
Yeah, when your brain, like, connects and makes an idea, or you get heightened, you get excited about something, that kind of frequency. You know what I mean? Like, that would be cool, too.
It makes me think of what you talked about with, like, the Deep Space Telescope, right? Where it's taking these photographs, and it's playing with the light range because it includes light that is not within our visual capacity. So it's not really what we quote unquote see, but it is capturing the full breadth of that. So what would it look like to take some of those things, and even if they're not expressed as audio, translate them into an audio format? And there are ways to do that.
I love that idea. I'm all about getting heady in this. We're going to get weird. Okay, cool. Perfect.
We're going to get weird.
Yeah, no, I love that. So I guess we have to figure out, like you were starting to say, what layers we want to communicate, and then how we transcend that, right? So if the top layer is your facade, right? Maybe that is the polished photo, and we have to cast like the perfect kind of person to this character, or maybe it becomes something that is more like the back of someone's head. You know what I mean?
Oh, wow.
You know, because then we're looking at the silhouette, the texture of hair maybe, or like some of those things that are just a little bit further away than being like this person's direct identity.
Yeah.
And that could be shot where there's a vast space around it. And then as you peel back the page, the idea or the physical subject grows slowly in these different pages. That person gets bigger and becomes more transparent. Maybe it's a person turning around to like face you. So we start with the back, and you're like, what do we know about this person? And as they turn around, they get more complex to understand like who they are. Could be kind of interesting.
Wow. I am really digging this.
Okay.
I like that. So what would it mean to kind of take a silhouette of someone and we don't know anything about them except this shape of a human, and then what they choose to say about themselves? And then the rotating and the enlarging of the innards, which wouldn't be photography, it would be archival, but it would be kind of tied into the photography, getting deeper and finding someone who would be willing to go a little bit deeper.
So what do we need the most from our subject? Do we need them to physically look like androgynous, where it's like you said, the silhouette is minimal, so it's like possibly a woman with a bald head? Or is it, you know what I mean, like someone that we wouldn't necessarily know from the back, and then you flip them around and it's like, oh, this is completely different than what I thought? Or is it that we need someone that can look however, but that you said that they're really more open to speaking about what it is that they, like what we can learn from them?
Honesty and transparency.
The honesty and transparency, you know?
Ideally, we want both, right?
But okay. You're absolutely right. But if it's not someone that we know, to say, jump on this podcast and tell us your darkest secrets, how authentic is it really going to come out?
I've got a couple of ideas in mind of people.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, cool. So I love that idea. Now, as far as like the space component, what are we looking at as far as the space? You know, if we're running off of the idea that I mentioned earlier, where the person is small in the photo and the frame is much more compelling, like just taking the idea to say like, appreciate the energy, the air, the landscape. What do we want that space to look like?
Yeah.
I wonder if there's a way where we could make it kind of spacey. You know what I mean? Like nebulous-y.
I think about the stuff you did. So there's two images that come to mind for me. One was the photography you did with Drew Wilmishire, where you had just amazing splashes of light going on behind him. That was really, really interesting stuff, and the smoke and all that kind of stuff. That's one thing that comes to mind. The other is it's really weird. I saw 9 Inch Nails in concert in 2014.
Nice.
And the most compelling thing about them, their setup on stage is super simple because it's a lot of electronica, but at a certain point what you saw was their silhouettes cast onto giant screens behind them.
Okay.
And so it was just a simple black and white image. It was a black shadow on a white backdrop. But I love the idea of the nebulous, or even like the deep space kind of images. Those are just, and maybe that's where it's almost like our place in the universe, right? Yeah.
So the nebulous could definitely be filling the silhouette of the person, or it could be the negative space around them too. Mind blown.
That's it.
Yeah. Okay. So then maybe we're not all the way about the space in the frame, but that the person from behind is the nebulous. And as they slowly rotate around, we start to see more physical attributes.
Yeah.
So it'll be a little bit of like photoshopping as far as like where the nebulous stops and the actual features of said person comes in until they turn all the way around.
It's almost like a slow fade in, right?
Yeah. Could be like a
I kind of like that better than the bones and
just because I don't know how to photograph bones. Like where am I getting bones
I was just going
at?
to go online and do Google image search bones. Muscles.
Yeah, totally. I like the idea of space and people. Because, there's also that theory that, like, we are made of stardust.
We're made of stardust. That's it.
Yeah.
Come on.
So that's cool, too. Okay, so I think we have the visual kind of component, possibly. So back over to the audio side of it. It sounds like this is just one final moving video, essentially, of the photos stitched together. This toggles back and forth.
Yeah, even like a slideshow that you move back and forth between them, yeah.
Yeah. So with that, it's going to be slow because the practice was patience, right? So you have the audio sounds of like the frequencies in the body doing whatever it does, but maybe the like writing in there really has to tell the story of like being a dynamic person, of like having different types of views and ideas, but starting out very topically about who they are. I have red hair, blue eyes. I believe in X, Y, and Z as it gets deeper.
It's almost like a playing against what we were initially talking about, where the more vague the picture, the more it's about the superficial, and the clearer they come into focus of who they are, the deeper it goes about themselves.
God! Yes, I'm pumped. Okay. All right, I'm back.
Okay.
I'm back.
I think we've got it.
I think that sounds cool.
And then on the audio side, I like the idea of playing with ways to use things that aren't necessarily audio and translating them to audio. Again, going back to that idea of the Deep Space Telescope and shifting the bandwidth of light so that it moves into the ability of human to see. There are wavelengths going on around us all the time, but they're not always in the audible range. So moving them into the audible range, or even just like playing with filters. So like the spoken word of a person saying, this is who I am and this is about me, blah, 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 blah. And then taking that and then just really pounding a whole bunch of weird filters on it. So it ends up sounding atmospheric / melodic, whatever.
I like that a lot. And the other thing I was thinking as you were saying that is because we've had this conversation about patience, healing, reconnection of self. I've been studying like the different like audio frequencies, like I think 242 or something like that.
Okay.
It's supposed to be like whatever frequency where it really helps you to like heal and like, or like to go to sleep or to like relax or to like get,
these resonant frequencies, the idea of resonant frequencies.
Yeah. And like how a majority of music is made in a certain like anxiety filled, like let's rage and dance kind of space. Like if we were able to like just fill the air of the track with like some like frequency that's about healing maybe or something in there, could be kind of cool to layer. So final thing.
Yeah.
Do we see this happening in the studio here? Like on a seamless and then we're photoshopping nebulous to person?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. I mean, that again, trying to get this done in a relatively short time frame, right?
All right. I'm in the mood. I have to come back.
It's all good. It's all good. I got all the audio. You got all the video. Very cool.
Okay, cool. Wow, I'm excited about it. What an idea coming together. Let me know our timeline.
Space. The final
and
frontier.
Patience. Ooh. This is cool. All right.
Eley on AIJCast. You can connect with her online at her website, which is eleyphoto.com. That's ELEY. On our next episode, part 3 of our collaboration with Eley, where we end up making a piece of art together. AIJCast is made possible through the support of listeners like you. We have 2 ways for you to support our work. You can make a donation directly through our website, AIJCast.com, and you can become a sustaining member through our Patreon page, which is at patreon.com/AIJCast. And we do love to connect with you on the medias that are somewhat social. We are there on a variety of platforms where our handle is AIJCast. Our theme music comes courtesy of our house band, Marred Fame. And we are engineered, mixed, and produced by the somewhat elusive Al Mudif, who has the perfect gift for the Al Yankovic superfan in your life.
We're going to get weird.
And I'm your host, Marthame Sanders, encouraging you to create some beauty of your own And remember that the world isn't truly beautiful until it's beautiful for all. Until next time, I hope you'll paint your own canvas with justice and peace.